Welcome to the Consummate Athlete podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete podcast. Peter, how's it going?
It's going well. It's that time of year where spring is trying to come. I hope that the weather is okay where you are, but it may have flip-flopped as spring tries to come.
Yeah, it sort of feels like it was an early April Fool's joke on Ontario this past weekend with the ice storm and everything. So apologies as we talk about getting outside to anyone who is still very much in winter weather. But I do think, we are seeing warmer temperatures kind of across the board. So hopefully everyone is able to, even if they can't get out to ride, at least can get out to move a little bit outdoors in a way that isn't too uncomfortable.
That's right. So today we're going to talk around 3 different questions that are all sort of in the spring. How do I transition outside? How do I avoid burnout? How do I incorporate group rides? And can I train outside? Those are sort of the questions we're going to wrestle with today.
Yeah. And I mean, it's funny, every year we talk about this, but I think every year, no matter how seasoned you are as a cyclist, there's still a bit of just like, when you're first getting into those first few outdoor rides. It seems like in the winter, we all kind of forget how to dress to go outside, especially in that spring where, you start the ride cold and then after, 5 minutes, you're sweaty again.
Yeah, and so that's what I'll see. And I'm lucky as a coach. I can see these things where there's these trends of people trying, it was really warm outside. We got outside and it's glorious. The spring, the summer is here. We'll wear shorts for the rest of the year. And so, of course, that's a trap. Winter is coming, especially in the north, where we're from in Ontario. It's probably middle of May before you should have that indoor trainer. You can put that away and you probably won't need it very much before you're going to need, things like leg warmers and coats and have to deal with wind and rain and snow. This stuff comes and goes throughout April, certainly where we're from. It could be different where you are, but I expect you're going to see different inclement types of weather throughout the spring. That's the nature of the spring. It's not yet the summer.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things to do is if you look back at, Paris to Ancaster is one of the early season races in Ontario, really well-known kind of gravel cyclocrossy event, super fun if you haven't done it before. I love looking at photos from that from year to year to year because like what people are wearing in it is so variable. We've done it in some years where we've, shorts and short sleeve jerseys and other years where thermals and a jacket.
Right, which is, I guess that's a great way to look at it. That's the very end of April. And so usually it is rain, snowing, there's mud, there's as Molly says, there's variation year to year. That week could be nice, but often it is not. And often there isn't a lot of outdoor riding before that event. Some years, in fact, there is. Maybe on the weekend you can get out, but it's often not a ton. Those are the spring classics. If you think about like a classic Paris-Roubaix, it is muddy and just inclement. And again, that race happens around the same time as it's towards the end of April. So that's what we're expecting. And so I think with all of these questions, it's setting those expectations that it is not summer. Stop telling yourself that it will be like this forever. If you do get a nice day, enjoy the nice day. Get the big long ride in, see your friends again, but do not expect that the next 100 days of your life are going to be like this.
For sure. And okay, so for you as a coach, this is sort of an interesting one. And, we've talked in the past about how to modify workouts or how to like change your schedule if you have to. And, the TLDR of that is we don't want to, deviate too much from the schedule when we, don't have to. But say Friday, or let's just swap Saturday, Sunday. So Saturday is going to be kind of crappy out. Sunday is going to be gorgeous out. How do you have people think about should they switch their rides based on the weather, right? Like do your long ride on Sunday, do your intervals indoors on Saturday if the weather is going to be crappy on Saturday. Because I think this is, this is like the big thing. As it gets nicer, the urge to train with the weather rather than with the schedule.
Or your body. Yeah. Yeah. So I tend to not necessarily do a ton of tweaking personally. Some people will, and a little bit of flipping or switching or extending is fine. Most people are not so maxed out on their schedule that it really matters that much if you ride a little bit more, or you actually ride on a Friday. Usually you don't ride on a Friday, especially if you do this as an endurance-paced ride. Now, if this is a really aggressive group ride, then you probably should make some adjustments where if Friday is aggressive and long and really fatiguing, then probably Saturday you're going to have to back off. And maybe that is a endurance ride. Maybe it's an off day that matches the inclement weather day, and that's okay too. I think that does sort of move a little bit with the opportunities you have, and that's okay. But definitely what you want to avoid is the slam out the group ride that's 6 hours randomly on a Friday when you don't even usually train on a Friday, and then try and stick to your weekend plan of, intervals on the trainer on Saturday or something like that. You should probably accommodate for those 2 hard days.
For sure. The other thing I will say when it comes to getting dressed for this transition, this weird time of year, is I cannot recommend layers enough. Mm-hmm. We've done episodes on this. We can maybe include a link to the clothing matrix that we have on consummateathlete.com in the show notes. But this is the time of year where we really want to be thinking not wearing the heavy winter coat necessarily, more wearing, maybe a long sleeve jersey with a raincoat over it, with a windbreaker, with a vest, like thinking things that you can take off, unzip, etc. I actually have a great Gore jacket that like looks kind of dorky when you do it, but it does have the sleeves zip off. Although oddly not into a vest, into a short sleeve, which I still cannot get on board with. Okay. I think it's to avoid chafing when it is fully zipped up because the zips are on the shoulders.
Oh.
So I think it makes sense, but it looks really stupid. I'm not going to lie, but it's so practical.
Short sleeve jacket does sound like an odd choice, but okay. So we are sort of like, so our first question was sort of towards transitioning outside. Is that what
Yes, exactly. Adjusting training as I transition from indoor riding to outdoor rides. We're already deep in this question. Sorry. I apologize.
Yeah. So that is, so Molly sort of hit on a couple things there. So it is do you take the opportunity on a Friday or a Saturday to get outside if the weather's out? Of course, always train outside if you can. That's what I generally will tell people is I don't really want you to train indoors if you never have to do that. So just if you can go outside, go outside. Now the question would be, can I train outside? And of course, cycling training didn't used to be indoors at all. We didn't used to have trainers. If you go back, 100 years, people didn't ride bicycles indoors. So cycling training, cycling coaching all evolved for outdoors. So yes, you should do this outdoors. And so for some folks who have started cycling training or started cycling indoors on Zwift, on smart trainers, it sort of is like, oh, well, how do you train outdoors? And I've said this on the podcast before. I laugh because I also get the other question. There's some people who can't imagine training during the winter indoors. They put their bike up in the garage, they hang it up, and then they go ski and walk and take it off or do whatever they do in the winter. So there's sort of this, like, I get the question from both sides. And so in both cases, I'm sort of confused and try and show the other paradigm, the other point of view. And so the trick for the folks who are trying to transition outdoors then is to think, okay, well, have you ever gone quickly up a hill before? And no, I've done that. I've gone fast up the local hill. It took me 6 minutes. Okay. All right. Well, could you do 4 by 5 minutes or 4 by 6 minutes or something like that? Oh, okay. Well, yeah, that sounds a lot like, is that like Zwift? I've heard this from some of the youths that said, oh, this is like a Zwift workout. And I said, no, I think this is just intervals. But again, the paradigm is different, right? So that would be one thing. And then maybe you've done a hard group ride or some sort of race in the past. And it's like, well, was your heart rate up really hard? Oh yeah, it was up in zone 4 or whatever the words the person uses. It was 180 beats for 6 hours or 4 hours or 2 hours. Okay, so you could go hard, you could go vigorous and keep your heart rate up for say 20 minutes, 2 by 20 minutes, a nice safe route maybe, or a loop you've done. So that usually is the idea is you start thinking, okay, I can go from here to there quickly. And that's an interval. And then maybe you go back, you flip around and you come back at me and you do that vigorously. So that's sort of the transition outside. And so the lesson would be to keep it pretty easy. Things like 2 by 20, 5 by 5, 3 by 5, 5 by 3. We do a lot of 3s and 5s. We have 5 fingers. We can count to 3. This is a lot of good training is in sort of that type of rhythm.
And I think not being too precious about it. Like, I think the big mindset shift that has to come when you go from indoor to outdoor is that your intervals are not going to be as perfect, perhaps, as they would be on Zwift because, wind, hill, stop signs, stoplights. Like, yes, try to find, the most optimized route. But, most climbs are going to have little dips in them or like little descents midway through. A deer is going to come out in front of you on the road and you're going to have to, stop. So don't be so attached to a interval being perfect. I think, the 80% is a passing grade that we're always mentioning here.
Sure. And you'll get better at it. You just need to try it a few times. And then you'll say, oh, I shouldn't have gone on that route, but this interval I did on this road, this went really well. And then you'll start figuring out how to do that.
One thing is if you are newer to doing your intervals outdoors, prioritize safety first. Like, I'm just going to throw that out there. Just make sure that you're keeping your head up, paying attention to traffic, stopping at stop signs, et cetera. Because I think if you're really like genuinely, you've mainly done intervals on Zwift and stuff, it is a bit of a culture shock when you do get outside.
And that's often why I talk more towards hill intervals. And you sort of say, well, it doesn't have to be on hills for sure. But for most people, if they go up a hill, that's the max effort they can do to get up that hill. So it's sort of, okay, can you go up that hill today 3 times? We said keep it 3s and 5s so you can count that high. And so maybe the hill takes you 5 minutes and you do it 3 times. And that's your first outdoor interval workout you're going to try. And then that way you just think, I'm going to look at the time at the end of it. How long did it take me? So it took you 5 minutes and 2 seconds, 5 minutes and 5 seconds, 5 minutes and 3 seconds because you went a little faster at the end of the third one. Great. Okay. So now next week you could come back and you could say, I'm going to try and go a little faster. I'm going to try and keep them a little more steady. I'm going to try and do a negative split where I go 5:10, 5:5, and then 5 minutes right on. So you could start varying that however you want. And you don't have to look at your Garmin the whole time. You just need to focus going up the hill, be nice and smooth, make sure you're shifting to keep your gearing and stuff. And again, the more you do it, the more it will make sense. If we talk about it for a long time, then often you get all confused. But if you go out and you say, this is what I did, then you can take that point on the map, you know where you are now, and we can move it one way or the other. That didn't work, try another hill. You went way too hard and you didn't finish. Go easier next time. You didn't go hard enough. Go harder next time. Or this went great. Add another rep. Next week it's 4x5 or something like that. So this is the thing of we get it and just try it, but you have to go out with that intention that you're going to try it. And so to Molly's point, we want to avoid things that are super particular. Like you have to hold 193 watts for 18 minutes, and then you're going to do a 16-minute interval and then a 13. You don't want to have convoluted.
Who has that in their workouts?
Well, that would be something like on an indoor trainer where the smart trainer is just saying 18 minutes, 13 minutes, 11 minutes, and it's nailing the wattage. That's not how the real world works, but that's just sort of entertaining you and is like a mental game. Not that you would never use ladders outside. People do that all the time at tracks, and I use things like that. We do a lot of like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is a great workout on a hill too, or anywhere. But in general, keep it easy so you can remember it the first few times.
Love it. Love it. I'll also add the, transition to outdoor is a good reminder to spring clean your stuff. You mentioned gears. So this is a good chance to, make sure your bike is in good working order.
And I saw you had our post go up there about the nutrition stuff. So yes. Checking your power bar from 1999, as old as my Schwinn Moab that I mentioned. I guess that was in our last podcast or coming in the future.
Coming in the future.
Okay. In any case, I had a Schwinn Moab in 1999. If you have a power bar that could have been, in my saddlebag on that bike, probably good to
Probably time to get rid of it. Yeah. We always joke about the power bar because we genuinely did travel with a power bar for, I think, a solid 8 years. And I think when you started traveling with me, like it was my power bar and it was already probably 5
right. And then it became our power bar. It came to our wedding 8 years later.
Yep.
Then we decided we should spring clean.
So yes, this is a good chance to get rid of those, gross expired gels, bars. It's the powder that's like chunked up in the bottom of a bag, all that kind of stuff.
For expiry, it's also some of that stuff is just junky. You don't need some of those supplements. So yeah, clear out the cupboard, make it, what's some of those words people use for that? Like really, feng shui type setup. Like you feel good about your cabinets and being decanted.
Yeah, make it aesthetic. It'll make you, honestly, I do think like when you have a nice cabinet with like all of your stuff really like well arranged and it's all, it just looks nicer. I think it does make you feel better because then you're actually more inclined to grab the stuff and like head out with it. And
well, and keep it simple. I mean, right now we have sort of, I'm trying to think about our usual drawer, and it would be like we have our thing of Tailwind, sugar powder. We have some gels. We have like a couple types of gels we like, but they're all sort of similar amounts of carb. And then we have usually electrolytes and then bars. So a mix of Cliff bars. And then, those electrolyte noon tablets, we have a bunch of those. So it's sort of just like those 4 basic things. And those are in a drawer that we can roll out. And then it's like, this is what I'm taking. So it's really, really nice as you go and leave.
I always remember, I think it was probably 15 years ago, Georgia Gould, like Olympic mountain biker, cyclocrosser extraordinaire. I remember it was a blog or something where she had a picture of her like food drawers, and it was just like, the clear plastic drawers, but they were so beautifully arranged. And, my brain didn't really like click to the fact that she was sponsored by Cliff Bar. Of course, her nutrition was like beautifully arranged and like aesthetic. But I remember that's been like, I've been chasing that high ever since. Like, I just want my food to look like that.
Yeah. Cliff stuff was good because you could have the blocks and the gels and the recovery and
it was beautiful. It was beautiful.
Okay. So that's, again, something, if you're someone who really likes gear organization and that gets you motivated, then that would be a super thing. And again, relates to getting outside and some of the hazards, the mistakes that folks might make as they go outside versus inside. You need to be a bit more organized. So this question was more getting outside.
Yep. And do you want to get to the next one here?
Sure.
Okay. So the best way to balance early season races, group rides, and structured training, how to fit it all in without overdoing it. And I think overdoing it is the watchword for this episode. As it gets warmer, it's way more tempting to get out, to do the Hammerfest group ride, and then do your intervals, and then do a long ride, all because the sun is finally shining and you can.
So we did a podcast, was that a week ago? I've lost track of our virtual time that we're in here as we record this. It was the headline. We covered a couple questions, but the headline was when or if you should do 3-hour trainer rides. And so for some people, we probably seemed like we were stupid because we were saying don't do 3-hour trainer rides, at least very often. And these are the certain circumstances, but most people don't need to do them. And so you might have said that's stupid, but the idea is that you don't burn out. Like generally, I don't have people burn out, at least because of that. They might, have a lot going on in their life or whatever, but it's not usually because we've overdone training. We try and be just at the right amount, that you could call it the minimum effective dose, the optimum dose, whatever. And then as we get outside and we get closer to the event, the goal, then we start hustling a bit harder. But what you'll see is if someone's been hustling since October on their Zwift racing, and when I say hustle, I mean like they've been drilling intensity 3 days a week as an adult, pushing the duration past what they can get done. 90 minutes still is boring on a trainer, but I think that there's like a sweet spot there where you can do it, you get used to it. That's a couple TV shows, a couple good albums, however you do it. It's a good amount of training, but it's not so much that like you have really sunk your Saturday sitting on an indoor trainer and really depleted yourself. So usually the spring for most of the people we work with isn't a big deal. They're super psyched to get outside and they have enough fitness that they're able to then scale up versus being just maxed on their motivation and again, depleted, this sort of thing that those longer rides do. So if you've done a good job on that, then usually you can scale up, but you want to be careful that you don't go, triple what you were doing as well. You want to ease into that first little bit. So it could be that first really nice day rather than it being a 7-hour ride to try and catch up or to maximize it before winter returns. It might be that 3-hour day. We see how the legs and the body respond to that 3-hour day. And then, of course, we're carrying all those Cliff blocks and things that were beautifully arranged in our drawer and allowed us to select the right amount of fuel to get us through that ride, right? A lot of times you'll see people go out with 1 bottle of water because that's what they've been using on the trainer. Maybe they didn't expect that the ride would be long and it was nice. And then they don't eat for 4 hours and they go harder than they've gone. They finally climbing again and they're longer. So it's like maxing out everything and then also minimizing all the fueling. So those would be the things to pay attention to.
For sure. And this is the good reminder that like the amount or the the distance you can do indoors in 90 minutes is going to probably be longer than the distance you can do outdoors in the same amount of time. Just with
for a lot
with
of people.
stop signs, with, you know.
Well, I think just in this virtual world, from what I've seen, it's generous in the amount of climbing and distance you like. People roll like that's why we've talked about the Festive 500 was an episode we had, and we're not super big on it. And I said like that I usually was 500 outdoor kilometers. Indoors, I can knock 100K off in like 2 hours, and that's not even like racing. And then if you're in with like a virtual group, I don't even know how fast you'd go. And then that's probably with like 1,000 meters of climbing or something. Like that's never happening outside. Maybe if you're super fast, that might happen outside. But yeah, so it's going to be less. So I don't often even track distance outside. Like I'm not one of the like. I don't really look at it for, people. Sometimes I'll see like speed. Like it's not that it's irrelevant, the amount of distance someone covers or the speed that they carry. It's just not really, it's so dependent on other stuff. Are you in a winter snowsuit, or is it snowy out? Is it windy? Are you on gravel? How big are your tires? There's, so many variables that make speed and distance not the thing. What we really want to look at, I think climbing's still relevant. Like how much is someone climbing, but then certainly the time and the effort or power, the intensity that we can take from power or heart rate.
For sure, yeah. I was just saying that in terms of like the practicalities, like you said, of how much you bring with you, food and drink wise,
for sure.
Is just assume that it's going to take, even 10% longer and plan accordingly.
You mean if someone was like dead set they're going to do a 100K loop or something?
Exactly.
Okay. And then that 100K loop from taking you 2 hours indoors, it's probably taking you 4 hours outdoors.
Yeah, okay. Maybe the 10% rule does not apply to that one. Yeah, like that, just double it. Double it.
Well, yeah, I guess it depends the person and how fast they've been going. But yeah, it's probably, if it's taking you this, Molly's right. It's probably like 10, 20% at least.
Perfect. Okay. And then, thoughts on the early races. And I think like this is always tricky because, on one hand, you want to come out, really, really fighting, right? Like you want to have a great early season. But at the same time, you're also, thinking towards the rest of your season. So it is like a bit of a balancing act. And, you don't necessarily know how you're going to be going, how everyone else is going to be going. So I think these early races are pretty stressful, even though they, don't necessarily need to be, shouldn't be. But yeah, talk us through.
So we had that podcast a few weeks ago now around the race priority, which we said you can do whatever you want. You can prioritize these however you want. Good practice is not to have an A race on its own. Like usually you'd have a race, even the weekend before is pretty common practice. And we could call that a B race or a C race. The idea being that A is the highest priority, your goal, your big goal for the season. B is, you maybe most people's races are probably a B where you don't max out the day or two before your event. And then C race is just a practice race. So ideally it might replace your Saturday group ride or your Saturday intervals, might be a race instead. There isn't a lot of accommodation. It's just sort of plunked into a regular training cycle. That's the rough idea. You can go back and listen to that podcast. So in general, you come into Paris to Ancaster. That is a lot of people's reason for cycling. Some people, it's the only bike ride they do in the year. Those people aren't necessarily training. But for a lot of people, it's their big measurement. How was my indoor training? How did it treat me for the year? Can I beat my previous placing or time or whatever there's putting on it? So a lot of people do put a lot in that early season race. Now, we talked about in that podcast, if that was the case, you could do a bunch of Zwift racing leading up to that to at least get intensity beforehand. We spoke about how Noah Ramsey used Zwift racing to get ready for Iceman and won Iceman. That he was still riding outside as well at the same time, but he got these really hard, sharp efforts. Worked out great for him. So you could certainly do that. That would be a great time to have a block of Zwift racing just before that. It will call it Paris to Ancaster, but that could be Barry-Roubaix, any of these spring classics. You could also, if you can find a race that's maybe it's going to be a little poor weather, maybe it looks like a fat bike race in the week or two before, that could work okay. And then in many cases, it's just the first race. So we try and get outside, maybe do a bit of a race simulation. Maybe we do some of those intervals we're talking about, 2x20 on the bike you're going to use, and just do the best you can to get ready. And then you're in it. So the idea would be that if it was a B or a C race, it's just a practice race. It's the first race of the year, the first start line of the year. It's not the end of the world. You still work hard I had a good question from a young athlete. Like, so does that mean I just don't try as hard? And it's like, no, you still try hard. We're just not doing a lot of research. And if it goes well, we're happy. If it doesn't go well, we're not as anchored to it. You just continue training. If it's a really important race, then you're the type of person who should be out there training in the poor weather and really going for it. So I think those are sort of the two ends of the spectrum that you have to look at. So again, if you can prepare by getting outside, this is why this discussion of spring and stuff is relevant, is that you're someone who's really watching that weather and trying to get outside.
For sure, yeah. And I'll say from those early season races, the two major tips I have are, number one, for the love of God, if you have electric shifting, charge it the night before. The number of people in Paris to Ancaster that end up, DNFing or, very slowly getting to the finish line because their battery ran out after a mile, very high.
Well, and probably there's a lot of the wireless, or all the wireless, I guess, have a coin battery in the actual shifter. And so whether you've been using your bike all winter or not, those coin cells probably every year need to go. It doesn't take long, but you should, all these have an app on your phone and you can check the battery on your shifter. So not the one that you recharge, but there's these tiny ones that we aren't even aware that is there because you don't ever think about it. But those ones I've seen go bad on race day, and it's always on race day. It's always when you need them.
So let's go with press pause on this podcast right now if you have electric shifting with an app and
go
check it.
See how you get your coin cells out of your shifters.
And also, the coin cell battery is pretty easy to carry with you. Those should really be in your saddlebag.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to learn how to take it out during a race.
Yeah, figure it out first. But this is the kind of thing that, we are now at the point where carrying that makes sense. Carrying the spare battery for your shifter makes sense.
It could. It depends on the race whether I would do it, but I would definitely make sure they're topped up and showing full battery. It shouldn't be an issue otherwise. But if you're into something that's a little more epic, marathon-y, you would definitely want to have spare batteries available for sure.
Yeah. And then point number 2 is definitely practice your starts outside. Again, first start line of the season, everyone's a little bit squirrely. Let's be honest here. So I think the clipping in is very easy to not really have to deal with on the trainer. You got plenty of time. You're balanced. You don't you literally don't have to balance to clip in, right? So go outside, just do 10 starts. Clip, unclip, foot down, full on.
Sure. And that's a good reminder. When we're talking about workouts and training and intervals outside, one of the ones I really like, really period, but it is something I do a lot early season before the first mountain bike races, especially, is, as Molly said, 8 or 10 by 200 meters or 30 seconds where you have a start line. You can do this on a soccer field if it's not sopping wet, and you won't get arrested for riding on a soccer field, where you're practicing that race start. But it is that practicing the slow speed, so the start and then the stop. A lot of people are actually very uncomfortable with those two things, especially if you're a road rider who doesn't generally start or stop and you try and unclip way before the stoplight. This is actually something for you too to practice, where you get going, the bike's moving side to side. There's a bit of aggression in that. You can start attaching maybe power or speed for the 200 meters or across the soccer field. This is fantastic skill training for everyone, but for the mountain biker, Paris to Ancaster is a pretty aggressive start. Any of these gravel things can be a faster start, and you just don't want to plow into someone or spend 20 minutes trying to get clipped in. So I think Molly's onto a great thing there, that when we're getting outside, that might actually be a very controllable workout you could do in a safe park with no one around versus trying to do your first set of intervals, as a 2x20 out on a paved road or something.
For sure. Okay. Any other thoughts on the balance of everything?
Well, we did talk early in the podcast about not, group ride and the next day do intervals and then the next day do my Zwift race, because I was also part of the Zwift team, but then I went outside on Friday, but then Peter said to do intervals on Saturday, but then I always do the Zwift race. And it's like, okay, well, that's a lot of intensity. So you want to find a balance there where it might be giving up the Zwift team if you're going to do this outdoors, or riding endurance outdoors, or spreading those out if there's an option to move one of them. So maybe it's a Zwift race midweek when, it's still dark or whatever. And then on the weekend, it can be a group ride. That's a fantastic routine, right? But then everything else in the week is going to be easier. This is the 80-20 of intensity. This is the, you want to have lots of more low intensity training. This is intensity distribution, intensity discipline. So that's the catch, is you can't do it all. And so you have to sort of spread that out a little bit. So I think that's it. The other quandary that people will get into is that strength training will immediately drop out. I find this hard as well, especially if you're traveling. It's hard to stick to a routine if you don't just do it anywhere, which is why we like some of those anywhere core that are more body weight type thing that can travel with you a bit. But it is, again, planning that in. And if you are someone who's prioritizing this because of aging, menopause, performance, whatever other reason you've decided to do strength training, it's trying to figure that out. And indeed, it might happen on a day that it's 20 degrees outside. Now, that said, it's completely okay to double up. We love double up days where it might be strength training in the evening and you maybe get in the Zwift ride, or I guess that would make sense, the group ride outside in the morning or midday or something like that. And then you can also still get the strength training on the same day. And so in that way, that day is high intensity, but then the other days of the week would be low intensity. That would be still fantastic and is great. You want to eat lots during those days to fuel those two workouts and recover between them, but that would be great. And for a lot of people, the soreness, the fatigue from strength doesn't hit you till the next day or 2 days out, depending on when your DOMs get you.
Perfect. Okay, and before we get into our final question, quick ad break from our favorite sponsor, the folks at Payable. So if you didn't know, you can now take payments in a Google form using the Payable add-on. This is probably the most helpful thing that I've figured out for Strong Girl Publishing, whether we're doing in real life events and I need a quick way to take money. I have it as the registration for our Shred Girls Book 4 launch party at Mansfield Outdoor Center this summer. We've used it for clothing orders, jersey orders, but you can use it for so many different things, whether it's school pizza day as a teacher or subscription-based coaching as a coach that's just starting out. So many different ways to turn your form into a way to collect information and payments.
That's right. And you can save if you go to our link as well. And I believe that saves the fees from Payable, which aren't much. But then also, I think if you're new to Square and you use Square, you can choose between Square, Stripe, and PayPal. You can save on the Square transaction fees, which is a huge savings for the first month or two that you're using it.
Yes. And, when you said Payable fees, the big thing we really love about Payable, no subscriptions, no annual fees, nothing like that. They only make money if you do. So it's a really low stress way to kind of get started. If you're starting a new business, if your kid is collecting money for Girl Scout cookies, any of that stuff, really, really simple. And of course, we have tons of templates in their free template library. We help them make a bunch of the athlete-focused ones. So you'll see a lot of bikes in there. You can head to payableapps.com/athlete to see all of our stuff and get that really good deal. All right, back to our final question, which is kind of similar to the question before, but is really, I think, more on a bit of the mental side as well. Avoiding early season burnout or injury as I ramp up my volume and intensity. This is a good one because, again, it's nice out. Races are starting. It's real tempting to, 0 to 100, especially if you're someone who struggled. You struggle through the winter to get those workouts in, do any of that, and suddenly it's nice out and you're revved. Mm-hmm. And you see that motivation spike really high and then kind of drop off.
So we just had this really warm period in Ontario across, the east, at least there was pretty warm and nice there for a little bit. And then, as Molly said, there was an ice storm and a couple other things. The weather just turned a little poor. And again, we know through at least April, if not into May, there's always the chance of snow and certainly rain, the May showers and flowers and whatever they say about that. So our expectations are a big part of that. They say expectations plus reality equals happiness. I don't know if it's plus or minus or something like that, but there's some sort of equation there. And so we want to be careful that we're not expecting it to be glorious every day. It is the spring. It is not the summer. So we want to keep that indoor trainer option there. We want to keep our strength training as a great option when it's inclement. We don't want to set goals that are now every week I do 20 hours, right? That's not probably what was, your part of your plan. So you want to be careful. So when I was talking back in that podcast about the 3-hour trainer rides, that had come up because we had talked about me getting ready for the 100-mile races that I had. I had 2 in the end of February and early March. And people said, "Oh, wow, like, I could never do 3 hours." And so I said, I was sort of getting ready to potentially ride for 6 hours, race even for 5, 6 hours. So to try and minimize, we could say, burnout or injury doing too much, then I was aiming to get over 50% of the time, the load, the whatever, the kilojoules, sort of just getting towards that. And of course, across the weekend, there was even harder because I had a hard workout and then this longer workout. So pushing because that goal, and so that related to our previous question today, where it's like you're getting ready for a Paris Ancaster and it's like the number one reason you are existing as a cyclist, then these are some of the things we're going to have to do to try and get ready so that you're ready for that race. You're familiar, you're used to that environment. So that's where this question of like, easing out into the spring versus abruptly being race ready in the spring are different people, different challenges. So the recommendations are probably going to be different. How hard we push is different. But the person the Paris Ancaster is their only race of the year or the main A race, we can also push harder because we can then, if it's an A race, we would generally take time off afterwards and not be pushing. Presumably that person maybe is taking the summer off. Maybe they're getting ready for cyclocross after the spring classics. I have many clients like that where it's spring classics because it's sort of like cyclocross weather, I guess. And then they train, but they go to the cottage. They don't push so hard. So burnout isn't really a problem because we know we're going to plan the rest. We're going to step off the peak after that A race. So that question of like, how do I avoid spring burnout? We've already planned for it. We know there's an end in sight. That person's not going to burn out. The person who burns out is Zwift racing, fat bike racing, spring classics, into the road season, into the gravel season, into the mountain bike season, into the cyclocross season. That is where you can get into trouble, is because there's no planned rest. There's no season there. And so if you are pushing this maximally, that gets dangerous. So planning for success, what are the phases of the year? What are the A races? What are the B races? When is the downtime? When is the race time? And then preparing for what you need to be prepared for. So if you are someone who's going to start edging outside and okay, the group's going to start doing 3 and 4 hour rides, that might be the time that I do start pushing that weekend ride. Maybe we do a 2 hour and a 2.5 hour ride on the trainer. Ideally, I'm pushing you outside on the weekend if you have time, but that's where we just sort of edge into that. We talked about fueling. Something every hour is our very rough advice, and that avoids most problems. But of course, the more you're pushing duration and performance, we want that up over 50 grams of carb or 200 calories an hour over that per hour. So that's the check I give people. They come back from the 3 hour ride and I say, what did you eat? Oh, well, we stop for a pastry in the 3rd hour and I drink water. Okay, well, that's not something every hour. That's definitely not 50 grams an hour. So
depends on the size of the pastry, okay, but it's not per hour.
I guess if we averaged it and it was massive, maybe you hit 150. Like that's a lot. 150 grams is a lot.
I have eaten cinnamon rolls much bigger than that.
Okay. So it could work, but that's like too little, too late, right? Because we also want energy availability. So we want to make sure like you didn't fast, no breakfast, nothing in hour 1, nothing in hour 2. So now we've gone 5 hours without eating.
And I would say this is actually a really common thing that cyclists do because the pastry stop is coming.
You want to reward yourself. Ride to eat. Yeah. And so this is where this is what Red S is. Like Red S, it can be simplified to like, oh, this person doesn't eat enough, but it's actually a big component is the availability, is the fuel in the system, in the tank when your body is asking for it. So did you have breakfast, pre-workout meal? Did you fuel in hour 1 and hour 2? Or were those hours in deficit? So across the day, your body starts going right away. You still don't put anything in the tank. Then that would be potentially problematic in the long run. But also we would see lower performance, slower recovery. And then across months and years, that would be, again, where it gets into these more dramatic Red S things with the bone and the hormones and so forth. So to avoid burnout, we want to plan for what is important and when. We want to ease into things if we can. Not to say, again, you can get out and do the 3 hour, 4 hour group ride, but this is where if it is a big increase from what you've been doing, the fueling's important, the pacing's important. And then taking maybe the extra rest day or at least the low intensity day and the day or two afterwards versus trying to, this was extra, but I'm also going to stick to the quote unquote, stick to the plan, ignoring the fact that I didn't stick to the plan. Those would be the key things. So again, planning the season, I think is your big defense. Fueling whatever you do is going to really help. And then again, if you do put something extra in or extra long, changing to balance your week out. Take advantage of the weather, but just be careful that you, again, accommodate for that on the other side. And that could be working with a coach. I always say, do whatever you want today, but then let me know about it and I'll tell you what to do in the next few days, right? So that's always the message I try and give athletes I work with is you're going to have to make the decision today. If it's 20 degrees, I would go riding, or 70 degrees or whatever that is in Fahrenheit. But then tomorrow we should probably talk about what the next few days, how we transition back to the plan, right?
Love it. Love it. And of course, if anyone wants to talk through their training, you can head to consummateathlete.com, book a phone consult. That's a really easy way to just kind of get Peter to look over your training and kind of maybe talk through what these early season races look like. And of course, there's always, all of the coaching, daily, weekly, monthly, or custom 3-month plans, or of course, the tons of different pre-made training plans. So if you are not following a plan, we highly recommend you get on that. And you can find out more at consummateathlete.com. All right. With that, hit us up again over at consummateathlete.com. If you have any questions, we are, looking for spring. We're heading to Sea Otter in a couple weeks. So if there's anything you want us to keep our eyes open for there, any trends you're wondering about, any, very deep mechanical questions you have even, let us know and we will do our best to find the right answers for you. All right. With that, thanks for tuning in and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.